So this is my cover remix of Tyler the Creator's hit I'll Take Care of You, created completely on my phone. Hey there again, hope you're doing well. No studio, no gear, just a few lines of Strudel code in my browser. Looks complicated, but I'm going to break it down for you with the bits I found tricky. Finding and setting BPM, sequencing notes, finding instruments, and layering and arranging parts. So this is Strudel, which is free browser-based software, so no apps to install or service to pay for, but it has pro-sounding drum machines, synth sample sounds and effects, not just computer beats and buzzers. It endlessly loops patterns like a drum machine, and it's used by DJs for live coding algorithms which discover and play emotionally affecting regular patterns. But you can also use it like a DAW, a digital audio workstation, to create a regular song with different parts and movements. Really, it's quite incredible how accessible it is and how it democratizes music making. But it did take me a long time to get my head around some fairly basic things you need to do, like setting the BPM, sequencing notes, layering multiple parts like drum and synth so they play simultaneously, and arranging them in order. So this is all there is to the code behind the music, and most of it's just comments to explain what's going on, but let's break it down to see where I struggled and how you can remix it further and create your own music from scratch. Now, a basic Strudel concept is a cycle, which is a fixed length of time of your choosing, but that time will have whatever number and length of notes you write in your pattern. So, to keep the same beat throughout your piece, you need to keep the same total note length per cycle. It took me a while to work out how to play sounds one after another. It's not like a computer program where it plays from top to bottom. It only plays the last sound command unless you run them in parallel, which we'll get into. So without further ado, let's comment out, that's Control/ if you're on a computer by the way, the whole thing, and then we'll uncomment Control/ again, each part in turn to see how it works.
Okay, so this is the code, and there isn't actually that much of it because the stuff that's in grey is comments just explaining how the code is working, the stuff that's got the 2 slashes preceding it. And in fact these last 2 sections are just extra demos I'll show you at the end, or some other effects that one can produce that aren't actually used by this song, by this arrangement. So let's just have a listen to what it sounds like to begin with. I'm going to zoom out so you can see this little white box that goes around at the particular parts that are playing at that point in time. So that'll make it a bit easier to see what's going on. Here we go. And it continues to loop like that, so it'll do that forever. So in a nutshell, what's going on, I'll show you at a very high level, is that we're first of all setting up the beats per minute. In Strudel terminology, that's cycles per minute, so how quickly the notes play. We're then loading the samples and the other sounds that are used. Sometimes you can just specify a sound directly in the sound command, but in other cases you've got to load the particular instruments, like in this case. So we set up the BPM, we load our samples, then we define the notes that are going to be played. So we create the individual parts, some of which are just individual instruments, like in this case, and some of which are stacked parts, so we've got more than one sound playing at a time. So this is a bit like where on a musical notation you might have, say, a piano part and a bass part. So in this case I've actually got a voice part, so there's a synthesizer preset that creates human-like voice sounds. I'm layering that with some piano sounds. Okay, so BPM, load our samples and instruments, create variables to define the various instruments, either played individually or played stacked, in this case. And then finally we arrange all those parts, both the individual and the stacked parts, in a sequence. Okay, and this will actually loop forever. Okay, so that's what's going on in a nutshell. Now to demonstrate the individual parts, what you can do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out all of the code, and you can do that by doing Control A and then Control/. That puts a comment in front of everything, including the comments in fact. And then I'm just going to bring out the parts that we need to play our first instrument, our first instrumental parts. So I'll just uncomment this line. We don't actually need our sample for that first instrument, so I'll leave that one as it is. And this is the bit that plays the lead synth part. Okay, so I think that should be good. Give that a go. There we go. So I can do that for each of these parts in turn. Just comment out the parts that we don't want to play and uncomment the parts that we do want to play. So for the next part, we've got essentially the exact same melody, but we've got a different instrument. So if I uncomment that, and then I just need to uncomment this particular line, what this colon section, and there are a few colon section, seems to do is, there's another one here, for example, vocals on drums, is it means that that sound command will play in parallel with other sound commands. So let's just give that part a go. Okay, so you see that's using a saw wave sound rather than the vibraphone sound that we had for the previous part. I'll comment that again and just comment that little bit again. I'll just go through do the same thing for each part. Okay, so for this one, this is actually using the C sound FM1, so I need to load this particular sound before we can use it. So this part's got rests between the samples being played, which are represented by these dashes. You can also use those tilde little squiggly characters as well. Okay, and then this final part actually arranges all of these sounds that have previously been set up and assigned to variables. So what I'll do is actually just reload this pattern from scratch. So I just stored it locally. So we go back to the original piece of code. Let's try that again, that didn't work. I'll delete everything. Do new, so re-import. There we go, it took a few goes but we got there in the end. Yep, so this final part is just playing the individual instruments or sounds that we defined earlier on. It's giving 3 cycles to the synth lead, 1 to the synth lead 2, 2 to what I've called voxid, the I'll take care of you melody, and then finally the bass and the flourish sounds. Okay, so that's how it works, and I've got some kind of more detailed notes around how I work this out. So I got the BPM from an online metronome. It came to 134 beats per minute. So given that Strudel works in cycles, if you're going to assign 4 beats per each cycle, and that's up to you how many beats you put in a cycle, that would mean we need 13484, which is 33.5 cycles per minute. I use an online YouTube to MP3 converter to download the original song, and then an online MP3 splitter just to get the sound. So the lead notes I got from a YouTube piano tutorial. Note that the MIDI scale starts at C, so you go from C3 all the way up to B3, and then the next scale is C4, and so on. And I put the notes in sequence over several lines for ease of reading. I didn't use the cat command because the cat can behave in a slightly confusing way where the next line can start playing before the first line has finished. It basically allocates one cycle to each group, whereas when you put these little angle brackets around the notes, it makes sure it plays them in sequence. Right. So yes, this was the same melody as above, but with a different instrument sound. Yeah, here again I worked out the bass notes using an online MP3 splitter, and then I used an online audio to MIDI converter to work out what the notes were. You'll see here I've actually given a length to the notes with the @ command. Yes, I worked out lyrics for I'll Take Care of You notes YouTube piano tutorial. I layered the voice and piano sounds for this part of the arrangement using the stack function, which I thought sounded less jarring than having individually the GM voice ooze sound. And also this is demonstrating the use of chords. We can put a comma between the notes in a group to have them play together, play at the same time and create a chord. And then finally I use this slider. I assigned a variable to a slider so we can actually use this variable to grade in various other sounds. So it's used there, for example, and on the fly change the level of degradation of the sound just by moving the slider. So finally I'm just going to show you, this has already gone on for quite a long time, some other sounds that we can create. So I'm just going to comment rather this whole section so it doesn't play. Control / and go to these section where we're exploring these other sounds that aren't actually part of the track. So you can create an acid sound. I've actually again assigned sliders some of the parameters of that sound. Listen to what that sounds like. Once you come up that loud, I'm just going to change that. Just literally changing that on the fly, and then Control Enter will actually run it or update it. Makes it a bit louder. Let's make it a bit louder still. Control Enter. You can actually do these visualizations with the scope command as well. This goes for the chirping sound with this LPQ parameter. This changes the frequency. Okay, so that's the acid kind of sound, a bit like a TB303 knobs manipulated through sliders. Just comment that out. Control Enter. Okay, so that's just Control Enter, which is the same as pressing play or update. So he's actually playing at the moment, but it's playing nothing because there's nothing that's uncommented. And then I'm going to uncomment these babies down here, which is demonstrating the sidechain command. So with sidechain we assign parts to an orbit one. So these are, so one is basically ducking the other out, so one is lowering the volume of the other, so you don't have contention. So we've got two sounds that are playing on a similar frequencies. You don't want them to contend with each other, so when one's active the other one's toned down and vice versa. So let's just hear what that sounds like. So Control Enter. That's not worked. Let's try. Does that not work? Try that again. Okay, cool.
So the 5-step process to making your own original copyright-free music: 1. Go to Strudel.cc website. 2. Find your BPM and set the Strudel equivalent cycles. 3. Find and sequence the notes. 4. Use the Strudel Sounds tab to find similar instruments and or create samples. And finally 5. Layer and arrange your parts, like drum, lead synths and vocals. Now there's loads of documentation on the Strudel website, but it's not always clear how concepts and functions work, or how code can be structured, like chaining functions and assigning those chains to variables. But there are lots of examples of running code, plus the Strudel showcase, so you can literally copy and paste sounds and arrangements to your own track, and copy paste your own code to reuse it in new tracks. So this demo covers BPM, notes, instruments and samples, layering parts, arranging parts, and basic code structure and production workflow. You can test that apart and add it to your arrangement when you're happy, but look at other people's work to see the tricks they've found. You can do things lots of different ways, and a tiny change can make a huge difference to what your code sounds like, which on the one hand can be really frustrating, but at the same time shows how effective the Strudel language is. So you can do things like sidechain and create acid sounds from scratch. Now Strudel will never have all the features of one of the 3 DAWs like BandLab, Cakewalk or Reaper, but you can still achieve a lot with it, and it's great if you don't know all the musical terminology like time signatures, keys, offbeats and different chords. By the way, it's definitely worth clicking export so you never lose your work, which will happen if you reset your settings. Plus it means you can take your work to other devices. If you got value, please subscribe or share a tip or anything you struggle with in the comments. Thanks as always to my subscribers and for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.